Welcome back to Crosstabs. I'm your host, Farrah Bostic. I want to start by acknowledging the many things that have gone pretty wrong since last week's episode. The United States sided with Russia against Ukraine in the UN. The president and vice president then berated the president of Ukraine in an Oval Office press spray in front of live cameras, and then took drastic action to imperil Ukraine, hastening probably the end of NATO and spurring the EU president to call for a new multi-state plan to rearm Europe. The president unilaterally declared English the official language of the U.S., something he's not entitled to do. And this morning, as I wrote this, the free speech president issued a post on his social network threatening to defund universities and expel and deport students who participate in protests he deems illegal. Also, not something he's entitled to do. Which is to say nothing, of course, of the tariffs, which have already sent the S&P plummeting. It was down 100 points at the time I wrote this, or the former Social Security Administration head telling reporters that we should expect massive layoffs in that office to lead to interruptions in payments of benefits. So good. There is no question about where we are now. The old political alignments are broken. The United States, as a backstop against Russian and Chinese aggression around the world, has dissolved. And as the International Chamber of Commerce has now warned in reporting in the Wall Street Journal, the world economy could face a crash similar to the Great Depression of the 1930s. And it won't be doing so based on any endemic market forces. It will do so because one man wants to do what he wants to do, and he has never encountered real consequences in his life. So, in the meantime, I took a much-needed, long-planned mini vacation over the weekend. But on my way home So I took a much-needed, long-planned mini vacation over the weekend, but on my way home from our trip, I saw something else that wasn't great. Politico posted a story about a group of Democratic Party-affiliated consultants who met in Loudoun County, Virginia, in a closed event sponsored by Third Way, a centrist group. Breaking Chatham House rules, someone gave the list of agreed-upon tactics by the attendees, though I'll note not all attendees agreed on all the tactics, to Politico, who shared the document on their site and which we will include in our show notes. The document reads like it could just as easily have been written by neocons at the Weekly Standard any time between, say, 1988 and 2014. It utterly conflates the cultural left-right divide with the economic left-right divide. It accepts old-school conservative concepts of success and American imagery and elites, as well as the incel-brained MAGA concepts of masculinity and wokeness. It routinely places those kinds of ideas about language, imagery, and the culture war literally above material policy that could improve the quality of life for working people. And it continues to set the very wealthy off to one side. They're not even on the playing field that needs to be leveled. I'll write about how this is just an utter failure to understand the basics of marketing strategy later, but suffice to say, I see a lot of documents like this. They are usually written by either marketing novices or by marketing departments who have no visibility into the underlying fundamentals of the business they're trying to market. So I look at these recommendations, and then I look at the polls and listen to the clips of focus groups and read the research I look at these recommendations, and then I look at the polls and listen to the clips of focus groups and read the research from the Democratic semi-public pollsters, and I just don't understand what these tactics are meant to accomplish. Look, I do brand, digital, and product strategy for a living. I do it for big companies and startups, nonprofits, publicly traded companies. I use research to help develop those strategies. I also give talks at conferences about how to use research to make decisions. And it made me think about this time many years ago now at a conference where I talked about the value of qualitative research in product development. I was asked a very earnest question by a young product manager. She wanted to know how she should record and track comments and feedback she gathered from interviewing users of her product. Should she record them directly into Jira, essentially a task manager for software developers, so that she could assign the feedback directly to designers and engineers to act on, or was there another way to record findings from interviews? I mean, I sort of blinked at her at first, and then I told her something I want to tell the Democrats. Just don't do it like that. Every piece of feedback you get from a customer is not a valuable piece of feedback. It may be entirely idiosyncratic to one person and no one else. They may be wrong about the thing they're describing, confusing it literally with some other feature or product. They may simply be trying to be helpful, or maybe they're repeating something they heard someone else say, but not something they have strong feelings about. They may tell you they don't like something when they mean they don't understand it, or they never use it, or they just haven't quite gotten used to it yet. People in focus groups constantly tell me that they don't have time to do something, or that they think something is too expensive, and sometimes that is literally true, but most of the time that means something else. It usually means they just don't see the value in the thing, that whatever it is, it's not worth the effort, and they're fine with whatever they have or with not having anything. In one area of our work, we find the client's prospects often appear to be confused by certain discounts and offers, so you'd think one thing to do would be to clarify the language. But the real problem is not that it's confusing. It's that a chunk of this audience simply doesn't believe that they would ever be given a break on anything. What I'm trying to get at here is that I think a lot of people working in politics and political strategy and communications take polling, particularly survey data, at face value. They grant as simply true, because in politics, perceptions are reality, whatever the top-line numbers are. They look at the issues or topics or people that have low approval numbers and ascribe them as the cause of an electoral defeat. And that can create some pretty strange conditions. Sometimes you can get the diagnosis a little bit wrong, but still get the treatment right. More often, the wrong diagnosis leads you to the wrong treatment. Still, I want to bring you conversations with strategists who are trying to puzzle through what to do in this era based on the data they have, and try to show you how the logic works, or sometimes doesn't, and what the thinking by people who do this kind of thing for a living looks like, sounds like. So I brought back Dr. Rachel Bitecofer, author of Hit 'Em Where It Hurts, and now a podcaster as well on her own show, This is America, which you can also find through her newsletter, The Cycle, on Substack. We have a lively conversation about what Democrats should be doing in a non-election year while out of power in both Congress and the White House. I'll say at the top, I remain skeptical that trans issues and DEI were particularly galvanizing issues, driving people to switch their votes to Trump, or to motivate them to vote for Trump, or to demotivate them from voting altogether, or to vote third party. I think it had an effect, but I don't think it was a top two issue. I have other ideas about what better explains the state of the electorate, and I'm going to try to pull apart that for you a bit in coming episodes and in the newsletter. But I do agree with her approach to framing what's going on right now, in the tone of it, the frankness of it, and in its core message. Last week's guest, Mike Podhorzer, wrote last spring or summer in his newsletter Weekend Reading that the job for the Democrats was to convince people who might not vote that the stakes of Trump 2.0 were high. It looks like they failed in that job. Bitecofer shares an approach to communicating the stakes now, as they unfold before us, in ways that are both ridiculous and extremely dangerous. As always, I'd love to know what you think. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions for topics or future guests, please send me an email at farrah@crosstabspodcast.com. Here's Rachel Bitecofer. All right. So thank you for coming back and talking to me yet again. It seemed like a good time, possibly good time, bad time, to regroup on the state of play for particularly the party. I guess the phrasing is the party in exile, but they're not exactly in exile. They are, in fact, occupying about half of the Senate and about half of the Congress. But I wanted to talk about a few things. One is, we had spoken before, and this is your real area of expertise, is thinking about the Democratic Party as a brand. So I want to talk about where we think the brand is today. There's some polling out that suggests where we might start with that conversation. And then more broadly, I want to talk about what exactly a party who is in the position that they are in, that the Democrats are in right now, ought to be doing with their time out of power. Sure. And so maybe we want to just sort of start with the state of play. Where are the Democrats right now from a brand and perception point of view?
A historic low. Okay, they're at a historic low, and let me kind of explain how that is. Given that the opposition is controlled by a madman and his cabinet of crazy people collapsing the entire democracy, how is it that people have such a negative view of Democrats? Well, number one, most people don't read any news or information, so they don't really quite yet know how crazy Trump is, and it will take a while before those actions start to impact them in a way that they will observe it. But right now, the Democratic voter like Democratic partisans in data are expressing a lot of angst about the status of their party. And, I came across a stat a couple days ago on the internet yesterday, a Quinnipiac poll that had come out. I'm not sure if you saw it, but it was, it's a tracking survey. And what that means is one question that they keep asking year after year after year, month after month after month, so we can compare it longitudinally, okay? And one of those is always, do you approve or disapprove of the way Congress is handling its job? And you get your total answer of all the survey respondents. But what's interesting is when you break it down by party, because usually what you'll see is 90% of Republicans approve of the Republican and 90% of Democrats approve of the Democrat. It's a little bit different in Congress, but it's conditioned on which party's in power, usually, right? And so Republicans are behaving the way they've always behaved. But I saw something in the data that it literally took my breath away. I've been tracking the question for 20 years and never once in all that tracking through all the shit that has happened for 20 years have I ever seen Republicans have an advantage on approval in Congress, the congressional Republicans. Okay. It's always been 35% approve of Democrats in Congress, 15% of Republicans in Congress. So when this Quinnipiac poll dropped and it was the inverse, it was 40% approve of the job Republicans are doing in Congress versus just 20% of people who approve of the way Democrats are handling their job. I, uniquely situated as the partisanship is everything woman, immediately go and look at the crosstabs because I had a feeling that inversion didn't happen because swing voters are suddenly like, oh, I hate Democrats, okay? And they're not even in power. They're basically obsolete, which is part of the problem, right? No, what it is it comes from Democratic identifiers. So when you look at Republicans, the percent of Republicans that approve of Republicans, it's about 80%, okay? But when you look at the percent of Democrats who say they approve of the Democrats in Congress, 49% of them said they don't. And that was enough to topple that top line, okay? So that is, if there was such a thing as a political flashing red light, that's the thing. That's the kind of data you would have seen in 2009, 2010 as the Tea Party percolated. Okay, that is a crisis number. And as I point out in the post on the Cycle on Substack, you can read it there, or you can read it on Twitter. It's not entirely the Democrats' fault. Some of it is conditioned on this heightened fear because we're not watching a new administration, we're watching an autocracy roll out, and that's a different level of angst that people are going to be expressing. So you have to kind of account for that. And the other thing is that most people do not understand how neutered the minority is, especially the House minority in Congress. These minorities, especially in the House, you have zero power in the House. If the ruling party does not want it to put it up for a vote or to put it on the floor, it ain't happening. There's no such thing as the filibuster. There's no minority power in the House. And then, of course, in the Senate, they have an advantage. And then you guys might remember from 2020, when Joe Biden wanted to do his agenda and the Republicans were like, we don't want to do any of that, the media kept telling you how he was going to pass it on reconciliation. So that word, It's been 4 years, right? Here it's back. And what reconciliation allows is that one package of, usually it's supposed to be monetary stuff exclusively. That's why we couldn't do statehood or whatever, right? Also couldn't get Sinema and Manchin on board. But at the end of the day, the Republicans are going to be passing this first financial whatever they do, trillion dollars in Medicaid slash, right? They're going to do that on reconciliation. So when the Democrats minority finally runs into that filibuster, it'll be the first time other legislation comes up. That's months down the road. And so really, I think what we're seeing in this data is the reflection that Democrats feel rudderless and they don't look and see an organized opposition. Okay. And that is a huge, huge problem. It's also, I just can't help but point out, an avoidable problem. For all the head scratchings that we see on TV, well, what could Democrats do? I know what you could do. Okay. You need a brain trust. You need a brain trust that controls and centralizes the messaging. Okay. It's not complex. We need to make this thing. So, until and unless they do, they're in real trouble. And I think that was an astounding statistic.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up 2009-ish and the rise of the Tea Party, because that was where my head went also. Like, when was the last time anybody was that dissatisfied with their own party?
Right.
And I haven't looked at the historical numbers, so I don't know if it looked exactly the same or it was just like close enough. But the analogy does seem kind of ripe. It does seem like, I mean, I'll back up and say one other thing, which is I think the interesting thing about our system that really prioritizes this competition between two parties, and really only two, is that it actually creates a weird like threat vector, which is that the parties become vessels,
Yep.
and anything could take over that host body, right? If with enough sort of
Well,
momentum and
that's what we've
power and
learned,
time.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
we see the Republican Party, and I got shocks on Sky News on election night. A couple of Republican enablers were on the panel with me when I said, "Look, this is not American conservatism. That's not what we're going to see come in." And we know it's not American conservatism because it diverts in two critical ways. It is anti-free trade, okay, which is kind of like, the like pinnacle of Republican economics, and it's anti-Russia. Okay, the current GOP is neither of those things, and that's because it's not the American conservative movement as it was. It is a new movement, and it's a fascist movement, not a conservative movement.
So that then leads me to something you just said, which I thought was provocative and worth exploring, which is the idea that the Democratic Party is obsolete. What is what's that mean in this kind of current context? What is that? What's giving you that signal besides these terrible numbers that they have in terms of their own base's popularity?
Yeah, I mean, it is the failure to understand that optics are everything, right? So, like, if I was in a Democratic House caucus meeting right now, and I'm sensitive to this, guys, I'm sensitive to all the rational, reasonable arguments of why you're doing stuff, and you're filing suits, and you're doing this and that, and you are doing the things that you can do. But what matters is the optics, right? So, like, if people don't see a daily press conference with a strong messenger hitting back at Trump and calling bullshit on this power grab, that's the thing people want to talk about, okay? Like right now, when you're tweeting about inflation or eggs or whatever else it is, like to the Democratic recipient, the Democratic voter, it's like, dude, how can you be talking about this when they are coming and gutting federal agencies and firing people, right? Like, this is the thing that people want to fight. They want to see a fight. It's not ideological anymore. It's not about, like, if we get a Tea Party revolution, it's not going to be far leftist challenging centrist. It's going to be people who are willing to call a spade versus the other ones who don't seem to understand we're in a crisis, right? And until every Democrat is in crisis posture and showing that in their own comms, it's impossible to create the impression that we're in charge, okay?
Right.
Like people need at least some hope that somebody is in charge right now, right? Yeah.
I think this is a really interesting area to explore. I had some friends of mine who wrote a marketing strategy book called Just Evil Enough on the show a couple of weeks ago, and I said something that echoes what you were saying about the need to kind of get caught trying, look like you're fighting. And Alistair, one of the co-authors of the book, said, "What does fighting look like?" And so we talked about a few things that I thought fighting looked like, but I'm curious what you think that looks like from like, with the tools that they have in the toolkit. And I am right now calling electeds tools.
Tommy Tuberville motherfucking obstruction. That's what we need to see. Okay, maybe some South Korea, action. We need people. The only people who have power right now are elected officials, and I am sensitive to the fact that if it's a D next to your name, you really don't have a lot of power. Okay, the R's, those people with R's next to their name, they could stop this right now. Right? They could just say, that's fucking enough. We're not going to be aligned with Russia.
Right.
But they're not going to do that. Right. And so, for me, what fighting looks like is no more talk about business as usual with these people. Okay. This is a crisis situation. You should be doing crisis obstruction.
Right. And so, I think this is one of the things that I am personally pretty frustrated by, is the rhetoric that I am hearing repeated by other members of Congress. There was a congressman from Florida on the Bulwark podcast the other day kind of parroting this line of, I'm not going to swing at every pitch. I'm not going to get hysterical about every little thing. And the quote that made me want to rip my whole face off was something like, well, if you say that this thing's a constitutional crisis and that thing's a constitutional crisis, everything is a constitutional crisis, then nothing's a constitutional crisis.
Oh, I heard
and
that
I just
too.
kind of went, okay, that's not how that works.
Yeah. I mean, that's what's driving that 49% disapprove. Fetterman, right? John Fetterman. Oh, well, Biden did this. Bullshit. Biden never defied the fucking court order, guys, okay? He had a student loan package. They challenged it in court. It was ruled unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. When the Supreme Court rules shit unconstitutional, oftentimes they lay out very clear, explicit parameters as to why this particular program didn't comply with the Constitution or the federal statutes, okay? And then in terms of policy, people have the opportunity to retailor that policy in accordance to what the Supreme Court will allow, the law will allow, right? That's what Joe Biden did. And so how many Democrats have I heard this week repeat this line? Like, oh my God, not just Democrats, but like really like the never Trump world, right? And it's so frustrating, but to that, there's even a question of what we should be doing right now. And you know, there's a difference between accepting the reality, and this is a reality. And keep in mind, I don't come on here and talk about my personal preferences. I come and tell you what the public thinks and, you know, what you need to know, not what you want to hear, right? So there is a correction in this party that has to happen on two issues: trans stuff and immigration. A Democrat needs to be able to say, you know, I support trans people to have equal rights, but I am concerned about biological advantages in sports and college, right? Like, if you can't say that without getting driven out of the party, like what happened to Seth Moulton, right? Like, it's bad, right? That's a triangulation we need to be able to accept and make. Immigration. The last thing people want to fucking hear when they watch 3 million people come across the border, and the GOP was so brilliant. They stage managed it so well with all the flights to the blue places and putting all the migrants in the, I mean, they're just so good. It's so evil, but they're so good at what they do. And it set it up perfectly because, you know, here we are educated. You probably have an educated audience that comes from the upper or middle class up. Okay. I want you to imagine instead, okay, you work at the local oil change place 40 hours a week. That's what you do. You do these rush, rapid oil changes, back-breaking bullshit that you smell like oil all day doing. And you're broke all the time because you're paid $15 an hour. And someone's telling you, wow, look at these migrants. They're in a luxury hotel. Look at these migrants. They're getting free debit cards and free phones and all this stuff, right? Like, the working class is pissed at us. So that pivot we have to make, and we have to, our answer can't be, well, no one's illegal, because that is not going to fly if you ever want to win an election. Okay. It's great that you feel like that, liberal in New York City. And I get it, because I could feel like that too. I have a big heart. I'm a very big liberal, but that's not how humans are not wired in that way. And when humans are struggling, we have a poverty issue in this country, a massive poverty issue. Almost all of the middle class life that you see and we see in your neighborhood and my neighborhood, that's 30% of the American distribution. The other 70% suffers, okay? And they don't want to be giving, even though they don't pay any taxes, they don't want to be giving their money to migrants. It's not going to ever happen. Right? So that's the pivot the Democrats need to make, but pretending that we're just going to, from now on, we're just going to accept what the media did to Trump, which is never talk about all the crazy shit he's done and normalize him. Like, if you're a Democrat saying that, man, get the fuck out of your own head. Cause like that shit is not like, oh my God. Like, oh my God. Like, we don't want to be gaslit about the severity of what we can all see with our own eyes. Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's particularly interesting because, I mean, I was saying to somebody yesterday, one of my favorite Mark Twain lines, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I won't get it exactly right, is something about a cat who sits on a hot stove lid won't do it again, but he won't sit on a cold one either. Yes. And this is what it feels like right now. Yes. It feels like, well, we did all this stuff in 2017 and 2018 and it didn't work. And my reaction to that is I'm not sure what your definition of work would be. You won the 2018 midterms, you beat them in 20.
Yes.
What
And
else
we
is
would have
there?
just done that shit in 2024 because, again, every time I get a microphone that's recorded and going in the record, I want to make fucking crystal clear. We know what Kamala Harris's campaign ran on because we have data. And because Americans are tuned out people that watch no news or information, the only message that a swing voter receives is the message you put campaign money behind for paid ads to force them to look at, right? So the message of a campaign, the message strategy isn't what they're talking about on the stump, what they do on a stage at a DNC convention. No one watches that shit, okay? What matters is the paid ads, and what we know from that data is that we spent about $2 billion between the campaign and Future Forward and Blue Rose Research, and we spent 90% of it on positive ads defining Kamala Harris, and we can see why that killed us. Because in that same exit poll data, what do we find? 60% of swing voters in the swing states had a favorable memory of Donald Trump's first term. Right. And that's because we talked ourselves into the idea that it's all baked in and everybody knows it. No, they don't. And when the media treats him as normal, they treated him as normal as a candidate, right? And unless you know what we know, you have no idea the extent of this man's deficits, right?
Right. I mean, this is the other thing that I've become marginally obsessed with, which is that there seems to be no shortage of literature about messaging.
Right.
And I can't remember what the thread was. I'll find it and I'll post it in the show notes. But there's this terrific thread of political scientists talking about, we have all kinds of studies on messaging, not a lot of studies on attention. And what actually gets through to people, like how we can test the messages when we force it in front of them, but we can't like test the messages in terms of like what actually broke through until we get the results of elections.
And the entire testing regime is just, frankly, it's a grift. Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you because
let's talk about that. Tell us about the grift.
I'm out of fucks to give about the testing regime because they tested. It's like I went and I said to the party, what we need to do is make a super PAC and have it spend 90% of the budget napalming the Republican brand. What they did is the exact opposite. I couldn't raise $1 billion because I'm a loser and a nobody. They all have the connections. They got $1 billion. They fucking spent it on, not just didn't do what I said to do. They did the exact opposite of what they said to do. And their justification for it was something that I went and talked to David Plouffe on the Recount pod a few years back, and said, listen, we're testing ourselves into inefficient electioneering strategy because really anybody listening to this show might understand this, okay? Like if I'm a survey researcher, I have options on what statistical software to use to analyze my data. Okay. But it shouldn't matter. I should be able to use SPSS or R or Stata, analyze the survey data and get the same responses out of the models and the crosstabs because the data is the same and it's just a different package of statistics, right? With the testing regime, and I've learned this with Strike Pack, you can submit one ad to one testing system and it tests really great. And you can submit the same ad to a different testing system and it doesn't test great, right? And so when you're testing the same data and you're getting different responses from various different software platforms, the variance ain't in the data, folks. The variance is in the testing software that you're using. And so it's doubly pissed me off because I tried to say, look, don't worry about testing shit anymore. Like, we've got to stop fucking testing things, right? Like, test it in the field. If it goes viral and it's effective online, it's going to be good on TV. Put it on TV, put it on Peacock, put it on YouTube, right? But the distribution end is where we suck. We're invisible. Folks, we are invisible. And so every dollar that we don't spend on distribution is a bad dollar. So not only do we not need this testing regime, not only is it testing us into doing stupid shit like running positive campaigns, okay, it is counterproductive to winning elections. Because
This is this is great because this is the world I come from. There's an older book that's probably out of print, if I'm honest, that was called Testing to Destruction, and it was written by two guys, but one of his name was Stephen King, but it's not Stephen King. So that book was in many respects the inspiration for a company I used to work for, which was a market research company, and we did a lot of creative development research is what we called it because we didn't want to be doing message testing.
right.
The whole idea of it was we need to figure out what the leverage point is that gets people to register the message at all.
Yes.
And then gets them to do something.
Yes.
And that might be rational. It might be like gets your whites whiter. It might be it shares my values. It might be it just stands out from the pack. It's
But
doing
if it
something
really wants
exciting.
to work, it should be Shingles doesn't care. That's my favorite ad. I mean, why? It's negative partisanship. It's not partisanship, but what it is it says,
It is,
look,
yeah.
you don't give a fuck about other people, but you care about yourself, and here's all the shit you won't be able to go do if you have shingles, right? Like,
Exactly
it's
right.
the perfect cycle. That's why they've never changed it, dude. It had to have worked great. I would love to see the analytics behind that marketing campaign. Yeah.
It probably really, I mean, having worked on some pharma advertising in the past, like the blunter and clearer and like cost benefit you can be about describing why you should be on this medication.
Yeah.
And the more you can connect it to what it's really like to have that condition, the more that like it just
like imagine if
smacks
they did
patients in the
a
face.
pro-vaccine ad, right? Because like right now we got all these measles cases from all these unvaxxed, leper children down in Texas, right? What if they did a measles ad or a mumps ad that says mumps shrivels your balls? Okay, because it could shrivel your balls, dude. I bet you people, the dudes would be lining up for that vaccine, guys. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yes, we'll have a whole other conversation about when I worked on the HPV vaccine messaging,
fun.
but because that was interesting.
Oh, I'm sure it was, because like, how dare you give kids permission to have sex, right? That's what always is the backlash to anything with condoms, sexual education in school, and I know HPV. How dare I give my 11, 12-year-old a shot that's protecting him from sex, right? I'm giving him permission to have sex. Like, the conservative mind is weird,
Yeah, and there's also just a lot of like, I mean, again, without getting too far down that path, there was just a lot of you're having to actually really change people's minds about several things. Like it's not just the like you're giving your 12-year-old permission to have sex by inoculating them against a sexually transmitted infection. You are also having to break people's perceptions of what causes cancer.
Yeah.
And so like we really in that work, I'll just say this a long time ago so I can talk about it, but
no, it's interesting to me.
The main difference was like
world much.
Yeah, the main difference in response to anything we showed people was, are you afraid of cancer? If you have a family history of any kind of cancer, you'll do anything to prevent your kid from getting cancer.
Yes.
But if you think cancer's for other people, then you can immediately start selecting from the menu of weird ideas about children and sex and vaccines and everything else. And so in that camp, we heard all of it. We heard vaccines cause autism. And this has to be like 14, 15 years ago now.
When people were still somewhat sane. I mean, COVID has fundamentally changed not American public opinion, conservative American public opinion, because the public opinion, there is this element on the left, I know because I'm in Eugene, Oregon, and these people are my friends from Grateful Dead land, right? Granola funk people who don't believe in vaccines, but predominantly what we're looking at now is from the pandemic, and the pandemic, has as much impact on what's happening in the country today as I would have thought like a financial crisis would have had, say, in Germany in 1930, right? It is, we are definitely dealing with like side effects of that pandemic and what it's done to belief in vaccines in general.
And that I think also, gets to the question of, I mean, if you were to speculate, if you were to guess at the kind of Tea Party equivalent of what takes over, a possibly empty husk of a Democratic Party, what do you think comes along to do that? You sort of said it, you don't think it's like far left stuff. What do you think is the ripest set of policies or positions for takeover?
It's a party that tells the American public who stole their motherfucking money. Okay? Like economics, but not just, oh, we got an infrastructure bill and deliverable policy, because delivery politics is useless. Okay? Joe Biden forgave $300 billion in whatever student loans. And what did young people do? They screwed them over, dude. Okay. Delivery politics is not a thing, but what we need to be doing is posturing ourselves. I mean, this is the reality the Democrats are in right now. You do a survey and you ask people like which party is better on each issue. And I shit you not, 50% on Medicare and Social Security. Okay. That is an absolute branding fucking fail, guys. So like we don't have to get inventive. There's no we don't need 5 studies and another bunch of rich consultants to figure it out. What we know is that at one time the Democrats had the brand as represents the working class. And although they spent 30 years continuing to fight and deliver policy wins, and particularly Medicaid expansion for the working class, over that same time period, despite everything that they did, their opinion of represents the working class has completely collapsed, okay? And instead, our brand is stands with marginalized groups, which is a great brand to have as a human being. In fact, many of your corporate friends would probably love to have people think, oh, like Patagonia, environmental responsibility. It's a great brand as a human being to be known for fighting for marginalized people, okay? But it ain't a great brand when you face a dumb electorate, civically dumb electorate that's intentionally tuned out of politics and government, doesn't know who their own senator is, okay? This is why they're so sensitive to that immigration, migrant, getting free shit argument. That is the electorate that we have, and they are going to respond based on the information that they have, which is none of the well of reservoir of knowledge that we have, right? And you have to meet that there. And what we need to be doing is, if people are angry, like populism is definitely the thread, but populism is bad, guys. I mean, it's not a great thing. Like, I know Democrats are like, oh, we could be more economic populists like Bernie Sanders. But like, let's be clear, we don't need people to hate the government and, believe there's global conspiracies and that the media is stacked against them. Like that shit is set in both parties pretty high, right?
Right.
People are good and pissed off. And for 20 years, the grassroots in our country, which, I'm not faulting them, but, it's just the way that we evolved our messaging, has done a really shit job of attacking Republicans directly. Some of that is because we don't organize with billionaire dollars. We do grassroots 501c3s, and they are prohibited from engaging in partisanship in the way that a super PAC or something like a Republican group would be able to do, right? And so instead of saying Republicans in Congress just refuse to pass gun control or whatever it is, they post up Congress failed to pass gun control, right? Well, you and I, when we read that, we know actually what happened was the Senate Republicans blocked the bill, okay? Other people don't know that. So especially Gen Z and young millennials, we have made them so fucking angry at us. Okay, we've made them angry at us. Like, you have to point that horse to the water of where it should be mad. And so, like, the strategy going forward is crystal clear. The Republican Revolution of 1980 decimated America's middle class, decimated America's rural communities. The Republican Party has ruled the fucking roost. If you hate the current U.S. economy, the reason you hate it is because the Republican Party invented it with a radical experiment in their own Project 1980. Now we have Project 2025 because they're gearing up for a second round of radicalism. It is time for us to go and tell people in Montana, people in Louisiana, people in West Virginia who stole their fucking money, okay? And you gotta make sure that you're not, people say, well, we can't win Republicans by attacking Republicans. Okay, well, Republicans won a shit ton of Democrats, right? That's what that whole working class de-alignment, realignment is. How did they do it? Farrah, this is an easy answer. How did they do it? They attacked us, right?
Yep.
Like that. So bullshit, guys. Okay. Like the things that you think, because you're a liberal and you're high IQ, other people are analytically doing and capable of is wrong, wrong, wrong. That's the whole point of the book and my work. And we got to meet people where they are. So like right now we have an opportunity because people are going to be very pissed off, especially when these cuts start coming in, to channel that rage where it needs to go. And it doesn't need to go to the NRA or big oil or big pharma, whatever your tweet's going to say. It needs to say that we're fucking Republicans. I just choked on I'm so, it needs to tell people why they don't have nice shit or who just stole their shit, right? It can't be Congress just passed a budget that cuts Medicaid by $1 trillion. Okay? No. You got to say Republicans did it. Yeah.
This is fantastic because I was talking to Mike Podorzer the other morning. The thing we were talking about is exactly this. The need to be extremely specific with the language and to not say the Supreme Court, because the building didn't do anything, and not just like the general body institution, the Roberts Court, not the Senate, the Republicans in the Senate, like being extremely specific about it. So I'm also going to plug something he recommended to me, which is George Orwell's book, and in particular an essay in it that's called, I think, The Politics of the English Language. It's very short.
Yeah, I'll check it.
But it's exactly what you're talking about here, like the need to describe things so specifically so that people know what we're talking about, because
and just to plug my own book, right, that hit them where it hurts, there's a whole section in here that not only talks about that but teaches you how to do it.
Yes, exactly. Yes, please, thank you for plugging your book, because it is very, very clear. I mean, I've had a few conversations recently with local activists about talking about local environmental policy and things like that, and they're very well-meaning, but also like very up here in the description of the policy itself, when the whole point of it is like, do you want to be able to rely on New Jersey Transit to get you to work on time? Like, it's not clean air with mass transit, right? Like for everybody. For some people, yes. For other people, it's not going to be that.
Yes.
And so like depending on
like the people who are collectively oriented folks, like we're it. Okay. And when you look at the ideological spectrum, we're talking, so like, let's say this was ideology, most liberal, most conservative. Almost all those people are sequestered in the tail. So we're talking, of the Democratic coalition, a small percent of people who are really inclined to collectivism, even within Democrats, because although we are more empathetic and more collective oriented, we still fall on the bell curve of human psychology. Okay. And so like, even though we are inclined slightly to outgroups in a way that other people are, like, we're still humans. So like most of the Democratic Party's base is also better motivated by a direct appeal to them rather than do this for the greater good. Yeah.
There's a really great paper from Larry Bartels about this that's like partisanship in the Trump era or something. I think I have a copy floating around somewhere, so I'll find a link to that and put it in the show notes too, because it literally visualizes that there's more Democrats who, more self-identified Democrats who share particular policy preferences and values with conservative leaning policy positions and values than there are the inverse. There are almost no Republicans, self-identified Republicans.
To be honest with you, you wouldn't see this on social media, but the Democratic Party is a party of moderates who have been effectively branded around the most extreme elements of its coalition. Okay, but those extreme elements, like let's call it the squad, do not have a majority in the House, right? Like in the Republican system, that squad now is the majority membership of the caucus. And those people don't end up oversight committee, rules committee positions, right? So like, though there is an extremism problem in the Democratic base, it's very muted and weak. It doesn't control the party like it does in the Republican Party, right? So like, the moderate ideological like distribution is your average Democrat. Meanwhile, Republicans who are controlled by these extremists, who have insurrectionists running oversight, okay? And an insurrectionist running oversight, Russian puppets, right? Who have direct access to our intel. Those motherfuckers are a bunch of extremists that have branded themselves, because we've let them get away with it by never talking about them and only ever talking about us, as a party of moderates, okay? So they're extremists with a moderate brand, and we're moderates with an extremist brand, and that's why we are in a crisis.
Well, and I wonder about, it feels like a sort of 40 plus years of kind of political jujitsu that has been successfully perpetrated on Democrats over years, which is, even I was listening to Hassan Minhaj has a YouTube show, and I think it's Hassan Doesn't Know or something like that. But he had Chris Murphy on. I was watching it last night. And there's even just like interesting changes in language over time that are clearly like a reaction to Republican reaction. So we don't say working class. We say working people.
Yep.
Or we say lower income people. And like they're funny. This is the thing I've been thinking about quite a bit, that like everybody who makes money in exchange for services or things they make is working class. Anybody who makes money off of money isn't working class, right? So Elon Musk makes money off of money. Donald Trump makes money off of money. Like it's all kind of investments and grift and government contracts, I guess. but anybody who's making money through work that they perform for someone else is working class. But we've now thin sliced it all, right? So if you're lower income, well, then you're in a different class than somebody who's not, which, if all else being equal, if we weren't living in the time of oligarchs, would make sense to talk about. But it means that they got accused of class warfare. So they don't use the word class. They, talk about student loan forgiveness, but people get mad because some people didn't go to college. So then we're in means testing land. And some of this is the Roberts Courts' fault of putting us in this position where like only certain programs get you student loan forgiveness. I can tell you why young people didn't care about student loan forgiveness. Young people didn't get student loan forgiveness. That's true. Yeah. You had to be paying it for 10 years to get the forgiveness.
Yes, right? I know. I didn't get any of my $150,000 for my PhD student loans forgiven, just so everyone knows, okay? But I still fucking voted for Harris, right? Like, it ain't hard, dude, because the price was going to be autocracy, right? All right, go on.
Yeah, but I think like this is the problem, right? So every point of criticism, every moment that a relatively centrist idea gets framed as far left, Democrats moderate their language on it and essentially run away from the position. And so they lose credibility every time that they're doing something to help everybody. And so then you get the sense of like, well, if I didn't go to college, I don't get these benefits. If I did go to college, but I didn't get a teaching, didn't go to become a teacher, I don't get the benefits. Like there's like this narrow universe of people who got a big bucket of money, but it's a narrow universe of people. And then, so they do kind of have a delivery problem when they're trying to do delivery politics. Like they deliver, but not a whole loaf. And so
the system doesn't make a whole loaf, right? You can't. So that's what really has made this so remarkable, because again, you don't have to like it to be awed by it. And I am awed by how successful the Republican Party has been. It's what they have managed to pull off is abso-fucking-lutely amazing, okay? Because in 2010, in 2009, really, at the inaugural weekend in D.C. for Barack Obama, the Republicans got together at the Capitol Grill, and they were like, what are we going to do, man? We're going to be put out to pasture forever because the economic collapse happened because of us, and we're never going to win again. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to keep Obama from doing anything. We're going to go into a full obstruction posture. And that was when the Republican Party divested itself from governing and became totally this messaging system that we now have in full flourish, right? And, they did it all through Obama. They did it all through Biden. They have frustrated people so much by the policy. I mean, we are a country. I used to tell people when I taught my intro class, I'd be and this is what it takes to amend the Constitution. But effectively, the Constitution is unamendable right now because we can't even get Congress to get around obstruction and partisanship enough to pass a budget. We haven't had a formal budget in whatever it was then, 5 years, right? And, 2/3 in both chambers and 3/4 of the state, that's an insurmountable hurdle right now for these people to make. So they intentionally broke the performance, denied immigration reform that they proposed in 2007 with McCain, then did it again in 2013 when it passed the Senate and the filibuster. Then it went to the Republican-controlled House under Boehner, or maybe it was Paul Ryan, and whatever it was, they didn't put the vote up. Okay, they refused to put it up for a
Yep.
vote, even though it had cleared the filibuster and it was this massive border security and immigration reform thing. And then what did they do again? They killed it in 2024, right? And now, so they pissed everybody off to the point where left, right, and center, everyone thinks everything sucks, okay? And then we've also played a role in that, like I said. But now they're going to be the delivery of redemption, right? Like you couldn't make this shit up.
Right.
And I'm sure that when they were building it all, it's just not like they were doing in 2010. Oh, and in 2025, the people will be so frustrated we can collapse democracy, right? Like, but that's where they ended up, right? And like, holy shit, was it well done, man?
Yeah, I mean, that is the other thing that I feel like has emerged here, which is that whatever the kind of standard bearers of the Republican Revolution and then kind of the Gingrich Revolution brought into being, like they created an opening for these tech oligarchs who see like an utterly broken system, and they read Atlas Shrugged.
Yep.
And so they think they've got a better idea.
Of course. Yeah.
And so now we have all these like freedom cities, and we're going to take over the Presidio. And Trump apparently made some announcement about cutting funding to the Presidio Foundation or something today because, Balaji wants to turn it into a freedom city. And like, this is just like, I wrote a whole thing the other day called What is Power For, that is about like real power is sovereignty.
Yeah.
And not being governed by anybody but yourself.
No doubt.
And that's what these people want. I think in some respects, the old guard Republicans kind of caught the car here. They ran government into the ground.
Yeah.
They did as Grover Norquist asked. They shrank it down to the size that it was small enough you could drag it to the bathtub and drown it. And
well, they're
are
doing that right now. It hasn't quite gotten drowned, but once that baby is drowned, Farrah, we're going to see the public notice, right? You're going to notice when 20 million people get kicked off health insurance because they slashed the Medicaid budget, right? The 90% Medicaid expansion budget. So
this is the thing that I wonder about, is that people are going to start to notice the dismantling of the Republic at speed, right? Which is what's happening under our feet right now.
Yeah.
What's it going to take for the Democrats to be up for it? Because they're going to have to make a case, right? If right now they're underwater amongst their own voters on favorability, then the kind of sense of inevitability of the Republicans will break it so bad that the Democrats will necessarily win at the midterms. And probably, I've talked to people who basically had the point of view of whoever won this time is going to lose next time. Whoever lost this time is going to win next time.
Yeah, definitely.
Just because of like this thermostatic response. But there is a risk that they break it so badly, and meanwhile they're just standing by going, yep, they screwed up, like, but not forcefully enough that I don't know, that like it's another draw.
Can't do anything without centralized messaging, Farrah. That's the whole point of like my angst right now is like, let's just get a brain trust. We'll build it. I can build it. I can tell you how to do it right now. Create a brain trust and bring everybody into one strategy and one message, because right now you have the DGA doing its thing, the DSCC, the DCC, the DNC, like the state legislative version of that. And then within that, that's bad enough, okay? But within that, once we get into campaign mode, we'll have, let's say, 7 swing race Senate races. They all need to be doing the same shit, dude. Like, they all need to be doing it. And so, like, we can't fix anything until we get centralization. But to answer your question, what is going to happen, or what needs to happen for Democrats to have the power to really do anything other than, in 2026, is the people who are on the street have to be people who have never been on the street before. And unless that comes about. So like right now there's people protesting, but I get my senses that this is still the people who are reading the news, who are, hanging. They're not new people, right? We're starting to see some of that with the deportations protest, starting to see some of the farmers freaking out, right? Like we're seeing things come because what they have done, I mean, we're talking about, less than a month of being in office, and the changes have not been like down here. There have been titanic, like basically like a giant running through the city, right? And like the effects are slow to roll in like a tsunami, right?
Yeah.
But because it's not like he makes this announcement, he fires a bunch of people, this program at the VA dies, and suddenly everyone's mad. But over the course of a few weeks, that's what will
Yeah.
happen, right? And so, it's sad. It's sad that we have to hope for this because probably most of the people living or watching this have money, right? We have to hope that he destroys the fucking economy in time before he consolidates enough power with this talk, the civil service purges and all the shit he's doing, that when the public does wake up, if it does wake up, and that's an if, because again, we don't have great clay to work with. We've got, we have no one to blame for where we are right now other than ourselves, the American people, and the terrible political culture that we built and maintained for 100 years, which has taught people, young children, teenagers, you don't need to engage in politics at all. In fact, not engaging in politics makes you a better person because now you're not gross engaging in politics, right? So the chickens have come home to roost on our civic literacy crisis, which was first really discovered in 1950s, right? With the American voter book that I posted about on Substack a couple weeks ago. We've known, oh shit, voters don't even know who the vice president. I mean, the drop off on name ID from president to vice president is pretty extreme.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you do self-government with a people who don't even know who their own senators are because they don't care, right? So we are in a crisis moment, and our two saviors have to either be the Republican Party, and you got Mitch McConnell today giving a speech on the Senate floor. I mean, it's not much. I take every silver lining I can get, knowing that Mitch McConnell is going to die with regret for what he helped do. It ain't much, but it's something, okay? Because Mitch McConnell understands now that he fucked up. He may not say it in that way, but his behaviors really the last 2 years have made it crystal clear. This is a man who understands he fucked up, okay? Yep. And he actually does love the Constitution and the rule of law, even though we all disagree with it, and he violated it so atrociously on the appointment clause, right? He is going.
Yeah, he made a bad bet. He made a bet that infinite money in politics wouldn't break the Constitution.
That's true. That's true too, right? And now he knows he fucked up, and he's to die. He has to die because he's going to die soon. I don't want him to die. I'm not one of those assholes that root for people to die or get hurt, okay? But Mitch McConnell is very old, and he is clearly getting close to dying. And he is going to die knowing that he helped destroy the Republic 2 years shy of its 250th birthday. And it ain't much, but at least it's something,
What do you... what would you want anybody listening to this to do to help get us moving here? What should people be doing to... I feel like there's clearly complaints going in. The phones are ringing off the hook.
Yes.
That's happening.
Yes.
But what do we need to be saying to get them off of this I'm not going to swing at every pitch nonsense and into something that actually lands a punch from time to time?
Yeah, I mean, you got to pressure them, right? They're going to respond to constituent pressure, and they only respond to the constituents that can vote for them. So if you're in a district with a member who's been soft, or in Pennsylvania with John Fetterman, do feel free to reach out to the dude and be like, listen, this is unacceptable, because what it does is normalizes all the shit that Donald Trump is doing and trivializes it. And that's why we're in this position where the public can't seem to grasp the concept of collapsing the rule of law, right? Like any headline, like when, every time a newspaper publishes a story about what Elon's doing and they term it using his frame, which is that he's looking for waste, fraud, and abuse. No, he's not. Okay. He's not doing that. His job is to look through the budget and find things that are DEI or woke and then purge all those programs. Okay. And yet how many headlines have you read or stories have you read in the press that have characterized what he's doing as a effort to root out waste, fraud? And so it matters. It matters what every single individual is doing in this moment, whether you are John Fetterman or you are the person that wrote postcards and tried to elect Kamala Harris. This is the time, right? If you ever wondered, when you were reading about civil rights movements, I used to teach all this stuff, and I'd think, man, if I was back then, I would have gotten on those buses and gone to the South and risked death to register black voters. Well, this is it, man. This is the moment. Put it up or shut up, dude, because you know what I mean? So whatever you can answer is whatever you can with your own scope of influence do to either wake people up or force Republicans to rein this guy in, and to make sure Democrats understand the thing they have to do right now is fight like hell, and they have to be visible while they do it.
I think that's a great place to end. Also, we're coming up on the hour. Rachel, thank you for taking the time to talk to me again today. As ever, it's invigorating.
Yeah, it really is. It's such a great conversation. Yes. I love talking with you. So.
Crosstabs is hosted by me, Farrah Bostic. Production by The Difference Engine. Editing by Allison Preisinger of AMP Studio. Music from Audio Jungle by S Audio. You can subscribe to our weekly newsletter at crosstabspod.substack.com or visit our show page at crosstabspodcast.com. We are now on Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram as CrosstabsPod, where we share links to new episodes and newsletters. We hope you'll follow us on your favorite platform, tell your friends about the show, and don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast service. If you want to learn more about what I do, you can find me on all the socials at Farrah Bostic or get in touch through thedifferenceengine.co. See you next time.